Yep, I'm happy to do that. Thanks, Michael.
Thank you.
Okay, before we do that, I'd like to take a moment. Actually, let me unshare. Brandon Rossi has joined us. He didn't make the jury selection, which I think is a good thing. Brandon, do you want to just come on camera and say hello? I don't know if you know everybody in this group.
I don't think I've met most of these people in person, but you know, I've seen a lot of these same names in various meetings I've been in. So I've been introduced briefly before, but hopefully sometime in the near future I'll get to actually meet most of you in person.
Yeah, thanks. Brandon's been working with the Yakima Nation since October, is that right?
November 30th.
Oh, so we went out in the field in December. Good for us. But I've really appreciated having him on as a partner. He brings a lot of GIS expertise and a really good attitude towards tackling permitting and project development. So thanks, Brandon. I'm glad you're here. So, and then also Eric Merton is here. Eric, do you want to introduce? I guess you introduced at the beginning. So Eric Merton is the fisheries biologist on the Clay Elum Ranger District. And the Taneum Campground project is located on National Forest and again is a developed campground. So I'm glad we have Eric here to speak to how the NEPA process and how the developed campground fits into other priorities for Taneum watershed. So Eric and Brandon, I'll move us through our slides and then I think we'll have a good amount of time for discussion afterward. So this is just to highlight that, again, the Taneum Campground is this developed area, the greenish star in the middle of the overall reach that's proposed for treatment. And our request to Surfboard for Taneum Campground is for engineering preliminary design of restoration work. We have some concepts and the Forest Service is moving through NEPA with the concepts in mind, but there is a need for more detailed and more technically engineered work at this site, and that's our request to Surfboard. A technical team was developed as a work group specific to this, and they worked to develop those concepts that would maximize floodplain inundation and aquatic habitat, while also recognizing that there are key things that need to be preserved from a human value perspective at Taneum Campground. So the group agreed that there is an asphalt ford, a footbridge, and some berms in the floodplain that can be removed to enhance stream function, but that the long-term integrity of the Civilian Conservation Corps constructed shelter, the way less cool vault toilets, and the historic Taneum Guard Station need to be preserved. The cross section on the right of this screen is illustrating the channel incision that we see in the reach of Taneum Creek through Taneum Campground. We're not even seeing the modeled 100-year water surface elevation accessing the floodplain. So this cross section is located, sorry, I'm reading Ryan's cheat sheets for me here. So we have Taneum Road here, and we have the creek here, and this this section is the area where Taneum Creek has been heavily armored to prevent destruction of the road. So the creek is continuing to cut down in this area, and even at these modeled flows is not making it up into this accessible floodplain. Okay, so here we have another flyover of Taneum Campground. I was wondering earlier if we're going to be spoiled for future site visits because we won't really get to do flyovers when we get out there in person again. So we see that Taneum Guard Station is located in the floodplain of Taneum Creek. We do see really nice, dense forested areas on both sides of the creek, which is promising for recovery. There's an accumulation of wood, which has created a pool. It's exciting. This is Shadow Creek coming in on the right bank of the stream here. As we move upstream in Taneum Creek, we see a footbridge, which is constricting flow adjacent to Taneum Road. The left bank of Taneum Creek here is a gabion wall, which is, of course, accelerating stream power in this reach of the stream. That wall is pretty recent. Eric can remind me, but I think it was just about 5 years ago that it went in. The topography on the floodplain is heavily influenced by the campground and the roads of the campground. Those pavers are put in because they do allow water to infiltrate, but they do create hard spots on the floodplain as well. I think it's helpful to think as we're going through this that it's useful to look at this and think that this is developed camping, and it's helpful to contrast that to the dispersed camping that we saw earlier. Just makes it really clear what the difference is between those two things. One contrast is that the boulders that are put here at the developed campground would never be sufficient to keep people from driving in a dispersed camping area. Those could be rolled out of the way much too easily. You just saw the Civilian Conservation Corps shelter go by quickly on the right. There's a better view of it. We'll see later in the presentation, but when you look at the topography of the area, that shelter is perched. They really did a good job of choosing the location, so it has withstood high flood events. Horseshoe pits, also very rarely seen in dispersed camping areas, but a nice addition to developed. There's our pilot and photographer. It's kind of a lucky thing that GoToMeeting doesn't let you do sound on videos, because we'd be too tempted to put funny songs over our videos. If you ever hear us talk about bollards to prevent vehicle traffic, that's what those little short stumps of logs are on the left. As we're looking at the density of these access roads, keep in mind that when water has an opportunity, it'll travel on the road rather than through the hydraulically rough forested area. So every time we have redundant roads or a heavy density of roads, we're actually increasing the speed at which water comes off the landscape and into the creek, which contributes to higher peak flows in the stream and higher velocities. So a goal of restoring areas like this is to think about how we can decrease the density of roads and keep water on the landscape longer. The campground is accessed by this ford across the creek, and this at this flow condition from last week, you can see that there's a hydraulic jump. because the ford itself is so low in hydraulic roughness. And so water goes down with some energy and further contributes to the channel incision downstream. Looking downstream there past the nice root wad, you see the road and the gabion area. Brandon, we'll have to tell Ryan it was almost like he was here since we get to see him so much in the flyovers. And then this is just a reminder that the road parallels the creek very closely, even in those areas where we don't have the heavy bank armoring. And I mentioned in the previous presentation that we know there are reaches of the creek that were straightened and dug to accommodate the road. So what we're looking for here are ways to reconnect the channel with its historic floodplain surface and move it away from the straight plain bed channel type it shows now. We're just never going to get views like this when we go out there in person in the future. So Taneum Creek now is on our left, or sorry, is on our right, and the road is on our left. We're seeing where the creek is prevented from taking the road. Okay. This is the footbridge and the associated riprap that is proposed for removal because it is creating a pinch point here in the valley bottom. This is just upstream of that footbridge where the creek is locked between the gabion wall and some unnatural topography on the right bank associated with the campground. I know folks have heard a lot about stage 0, and one of the great things that has come out of talking so much about stage 0 is that we're all talking about the stream evolution model now. And the stream evolution model reminds us that when a creek is locked in like this between heavy armoring and a heavily armored, more rocky bank on one side, the only place it can go with its energy is down. So the further it cuts down, the more disconnected it is from its floodplain. And until it's able to create a new inset floodplain, we just really see the channel in a fire hose type alignment. So I pointed out when we were looking at the video, but the Civilian Conservation Corps shelter is sitting up relatively higher, which we think is why it has been able to persist in the floodplain since the CCC days. And this is the Taneum guard station. It has persisted because there is a berm protecting it just downstream of the footbridge. Our model simulations indicate that the Taneum guard station would be flooded under pretty frequent flood events if the berm wasn't there. The technical team created this preferred alternative for changes to the campground. In order to produce significant floodplain restoration upstream from the campground, they looked at how Taneum Road might be relocated over to the toe of the slope. Let me see if I can get my pointer going again here. So in this area, Taneum Road would be pulled over, particularly right here as well, so that the creek would be able to re-access this area. The channel, the stream channel, would be filled with some of the material from the road decommissioning to help build it back up. The driving ford would be removed, and the artificial topography associated with that would be graded out. We would place obstructions in the channel to provide velocity heterogeneity so that fish have a place to take refuge, to sort gravel, and to allow the channel to become more sinuous. And channel obstructions is kind of a funny way to say it, but that's because we don't know at this point whether that's best suited to be wood or to be boulder clusters. That level of detail is not determined. There is also the potential for a high flow channel to match the slope of Taneum Creek, which would help partition flow and take some of the energy off of this channel where it's threatening the road. In order to continue to protect that infrastructure that is important to the developed recreation area and the Forest Service, there would be a small setback berm constructed to protect the guard station. We think this is an okay trade-off because such a large amount of artificial topography would be removed that we would still get a large amount of floodplain reconnected while protecting the Forest Service structures. We also, under the model simulations that the technical team has run, these work elements work together to prevent additional risk to the infrastructure. But they also will have longer term results as biological and physical processes start to work. If beaver move in, we expect to see really fantastic effects. And so we're hoping they will. This is an animation showing the hydraulic effects of proposed channel obstructions in this area. If it's not moving yet, don't worry, because it's not on my screen yet either. Okay. We should start to see some movement. So instead of seeing that homogeneous velocity profile that we see currently under high flow conditions, there's now flow complexity and energy is shifted away from Taneum Road. And if we're able to proceed with a valley reset approach, moving the road out of the way and using that fill material to help to build the creek back up, the flow modeling suggests that we will have a very well-connected floodplain. I think this kind of looks like fireworks.
And Becca, there was a question about the toe of the slope that might make sense with that previous slide you just had.
Great, yeah.
The question was about where would this road be located in this area to the toe of the slope, and it's just over on the right-hand side of the of where all the inundated area is at.
So right here, Eric?
Right, yeah, so in that area, that section of road would be all the way over there, right?
Yeah. Thank you, great. Okay, so this moves us into questions then. I think, Sean, you had asked last time, what kind of costs do we expect to actually implement the work that comes out of this preliminary design? And Ryan met with staff from Natural Systems Design yesterday to develop a high-end cost estimate so we know what scale we're talking about. Relocating Taneum Road and then repaving it, because it's a pretty high-level road, excuse me, was the biggest part of the expense. That was estimated to be $3 to $4 million. The rest of the proposed elements, so the regrading and the addition of obstructions in the channel, were estimated to be $1 to $2 million. So the total project, and of course there's many details to be worked out, might be a $5 million project. The geomorphologist Tim Abbey was on that call, and he also suggested it would be worth thinking about, instead of cutting a high flow channel to take some of the energy out of the creek, having that channel be the new primary channel for Taneum Creek, which would allow the channel more space to move and would get it away from the gabion wall. And Ryan notes he likes this idea. So, the technical team has invested a lot of effort in coming up with these conceptual designs, But there are a lot of constraints. There's good complexity to the design and a lot of infrastructure to protect. So we need technical expertise, and the request is to hire engineers to complete a preliminary design. If you're really tracking, you might recall that we originally were saying final design, and Elizabeth and I talked through this, and we think it's a better idea to pursue preliminary design as our surfboard deliverable, and then hopefully be able to over-deliver and get the design further along and our permits submitted within the time frame of this grant. Finally, the tag had asked for more detail on what's involved in the engineering costs, and we are asking Natural Systems Design to provide that to us. So that will end up in PRISM.
Elizabeth, does that answer the question you just posed about the proposal stated the goal is to complete the final design? Okay. Looks like Sean has a question on hydrology and geomorphology.
Yeah, what's up, Sean?
Yeah. So I'm trying to understand, I guess, a couple of things here. So you mentioned throughout your discussion here that the channel is continuing to degrade. You know, that project, whenever that was, 6 years ago or something here, that the Forest Service designed and installed, that included those kind of throughout here, which were supposed to halt degradation. And so I'm wondering, do we have some information since that project went in that indicates that it's actually continuing to degrade? And then my other question is having to do with the floodplain. So you showed a picture early on and said that everything was above the 100-year floodplain. But we get water across that that paver path sometimes. And I think you mentioned that and then the berm was removed as part of that Forest Service project, and those near creek campsites turned into picnic areas in part to allow, I understand the reason they removed the top of the berm was to allow a little bit more flooding in there as well as the riparian. So I'm just trying to understand what the floodplain is and if the channel is still degrading or not.
Yeah, and those are good questions. I'm gonna see if Eric can tackle them first.
Yeah, no, there were not permanent benchmarks established. That was before my time, but I don't believe that there were permanent benchmarks established. That being said, I agree with Becca's assessment as far as what that channel is going to be doing in that area. It's constrained on both sides. It's got a fast velocity going through. Yeah, floodplain. I mean, the values that you were seeing. Brandon might be able to speak to this as well, but I would imagine that probably what Ryan was doing was using stream stats. And so, if stream stats says that a 100-year flood is so many CFS, that's based on historical information. So it's not necessarily indicating current conditions, and especially with climate change ongoing.
Danielle, I had a question about the road.
Yeah, so Danielle asked if we had that overflow channel become the main channel, would that mean that the road would not need to be moved? So I think that's in this location, Danielle. So there's not a proposal for moving the road right here where the gabions are, because there's not a place to move it to. So I think Tim was suggesting that if the new channel that's over on the right floodplain there became the primary channel, then there would be the possibility of a channel that could shape itself more. And this channel would be the overflow channel rather than the primary. And I guess, Bob, I'm not skipping your question, but just looking at Jen's question, it's about the same. So there is no place to move the road right here where the gabion is. And I think, although, I don't know, Sean, you might've been the only one on this call who was in on those conversations for the gabions, but I think they dismissed the feasibility of moving the road when they opted to put in these gabions. There is,
Yeah,
Yeah.
there was an idea that there could be a road move version that would be $1 million or $2 million at that time, and it was deemed too expensive.
And that was to move the road up onto the hill and through the forest up there. So my understanding now is that we're looking at moving the road in locations where there's opportunities to just move it to the toe of the slope. And there isn't right here in this Gabion reach. There are in other parts of the reach. Did I capture that, Eric, correctly, or Brandon?
Correct. And then I also had something to say about the Danielle's question. So if we don't move the road over to the toe of the slope, we would miss out on reconnecting all of that historic floodplain that happens to be on the offside of the road where it currently sits. So if you go back to that flow modeling, we would lose more than half of that inundation of floodplain without moving the road.
Okay, so Brandon, maybe this is the right slide for me to kind of highlight where we're talking about the road relocation. And I think that we're talking about kind of above the T here. Is that correct? Am I looking at the right spot?
Yeah, I think when Ryan and I have talked about it, he's always just kind of followed that line where the aerial photo meets the white as kind of the toe of the slope.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. It's helpful.
Yeah, this is Danielle. If I could, I'll not type this. No, that's a great clarification. I was more, the area where you guys had indicated would have that overflow channel. I was hoping that might reduce the overall cost of the road movement. But thank you for the clarification, Becca. You've made it clear that that's not really going to happen in the Gabion Basket area. Do you guys have any potential other funding sources that you're looking at for the road movement? I know that that's always a hard thing to fund. And I'm just curious if the Forest Service, because it's adjacent to a campground, has any additional funding or anything along those lines.
I'm not aware of folks looking for implementation funding yet at this point. Jump in, Eric, if you guys have a pocket full of money.
No, that's exactly right. There's, money occasionally presents itself. And so we'll be on the lookout, but yeah, we need to have designs first so we can describe what it is that we want to do before we can really have much of a chance at going after implementation funds.
Okay, thank you. I know I'm jumping ahead a little bit. I just know that there's a history when it comes to road decommissioning, and I'm trying to look around the corner a little bit. Thank you.
Yeah, and Bob asked if the ford and the footbridge are removed, is the area west of the creek still accessible for foot-based recreation? It is, and I think it's even better than that. Brandon, can you speak to the access that would still be retained there?
So part of the main option that was selected would be that DNR would be willing, I think it's DNR and WDFW would both be willing to allow traffic to come across the Shadow Creek Bridge, and they would be putting in a new access road from the north, all on the right bank side. They would allow access to the full facilities as vehicle access and foot access.
So the campground would be accessible for folks to come in their vehicles to camp now. Okay, let's see. Jeanette said, if we use the overflow channel as the main channel, do we have an analog locally that would show this level of sinuosity, or to show a sort of a desired level of sinuosity for this setting, for the channel morphology, gradient, and confinement? Probably. I'd like to talk more with you about that, Jeanette. I think we certainly could find, probably even in Taneum Creek, something that would serve as a reference for this channel gradient and geology.
Yeah, I'm just going to add to that question a little, because what I was saying was I like the idea of the overflow channel becoming the main channel. But if that is not the case, I was concerned about the level of sinuosity chosen and there being an analog that shows that that can be maintained for that site, or that that's the appropriate design for that site, given the
I hear what you're saying. Yeah, I think that's a really good concern for us to keep in mind. There's still a lot of energy in a straight section there. So, Sean asks, what would the flood frequency be for the area will be where the road would be set back? Is it a 50-year floodplain, for example? Let me go back to that flow simulation. Okay, so the actual flows are like just cut off on our screen, so we can't quite read the legend for that. So let me get this image where I can read the full legend, and I'll share that in our responses to tag questions. Other thoughts or questions about this? I'm really grateful for the work that the technical team has done. This has been a tricky issue for a long time, and I'm excited by the approach that would preserve some of the cultural values here while still giving the creek a lot more opportunity to use its floodplain and to have more variation in habitat and velocity.
So Becca, I'm sorry. I'll wait.
Alex here. On the specific model on the stream, I know a number of alternatives were modeled, including one that was the filled-in channel, which of course was the maximum floodplain wetting. Is that this one, or does this include a channel that either would be left or that'd be accepted to reestablish if you went with the whole stage 0 valley reset?
This is the valley. I'm reading Ryan's notes. Oh, and it does say, Sean, sorry, it's the 2-year event from the valley reset approach upstream of the campground.
So that's a stage 0 kind of thing.
Right.
The question I have about this overflow channel, or some people saying maybe it would become the main channel, how do you expect that to function in a natural way when you still have to protect the CCC structure, plus the some of the campsites, plus whatever new road you're going to put in there from Shadow Creek?
Yeah, I think that's one of the concerns that really indicates that we need engineering for this. So we need this to be at a more technical level than some of the work the Yakima Nation does in other systems, because there are those key infrastructure elements to protect. If that sounds like I was punting, I was, but that's why we want engineering for it.
I know one concept that people have sometimes used is basically put up sideboards for where the channel is allowed to go. So if that approach were to be taken here, it would be rock or something like that along the road, as well as all the way over where that structure is at. And then you would establish the channel in a particular location, but it would not be locked into that specific location. So it could migrate laterally, in between those sideboards. But that's a design conversation that, like Becca's saying, that would have to happen with the consultant. I need to head out and do a thing, but thank you much for Mid-Columbia Fisheries and Yakima Nation both. You guys have been great to work with on this, and feel free to contact me any follow-up questions later on too. Thank you.
Okay, thanks,
Thank you,
Eric. Good luck with your thing. Pat, you said you had a question?
Yeah, thanks, Becca. So in the application in Figure 8, there is a profile looking downstream at station 950, and this is right where the Gabion wall is across the floodplain. I was just trying to understand, I guess, and clarify that when you look at that, there's this kind of this 300-foot wide floodplain with this big hump in the middle. When it's kind of like two humps in there. Just trying to, I guess, kind of understand those just like natural. I assume those are just natural, and trying to understand that low area that's way off to the right, 300 feet away. Is that actually part of the Taneum floodplain?
So I think we do think there's been berming in there. And I think you're looking at a couple of the berms that are in that location. I don't know, Michael, would it make sense for you to share your screen, Pat, to pull that up quickly? Or I don't know how quickly I could pull it up. But, or maybe just put that in your comments so that we can dig into it more deeply.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
Any other questions or thoughts?
Okay, well, thanks to Brandon and Eric for jumping in for support, and very much appreciate everyone's consideration of the proposals.
Thank you.